Bloomberg Tech Asia is live with Shery in Tokyo and Annabelle Droulers in Hong Kong.
Artificial intelligence is becoming an integral feature in nearly every system we use. And the defense sector is no exception. It's gaining some of the most cutting-edge capabilities. But that also raises, Annabelle, major concerns, especially over ethical application of the technology.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, these worries include potentially lethal decisions that are being made without human involvement, privacy violations around surveillance and data security as well. And even as these concerns are being debated, AI is already at the center of this new arms race as well. You've got the two global superpowers at the forefront, and that is China versus the US. As armed conflicts become more frequent around the world, AI is increasingly present on the battlefield. From surveillance and intelligence gathering to autonomous weapon systems. Anthropic's dispute with the Pentagon over guardrails for its systems has brought the debate about military use of AI further into the open. The race to dominate AI defense tech largely pits the United States against China, though each has a different strategy for winning. The States takes a market-driven partnership approach to working with defence contractors like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, as well as tech firms like Palantir and, until recently, Anthropic. China, on the other hand, follows a so-called Military Civil Fusion Strategy, or MCF. It's a core national policy overseen by President Xi Jinping, with a goal to develop the PLA into a world-class army by 2049. Beijing wants to break down the barriers between its civilian economy and its defense industrial base. The Pentagon says many of China's technological achievements in areas like aviation, drones and chips are designed with military uses in mind from day one. For the US, taking Anthropic's highly priced technology out of its military hands complicates its strategy to compete against China in AI-driven warfare. The question is, how do both sides manage the transition from AI as a support tool to a technology with a bigger role in decision-making?
Bloomberg reporter covering tech and national security, Katrina Manson, joins us now. She's just released her book called Project Maven, a Marine Colonel, his team, and the dawn of AI warfare, which explores the U.S. development of AI-driven warfare and examines how it's reshaping the balance between the U.S. and China. Katrina, great to have you with us. So we think of artificial intelligence war as something of the future, but it's actually happening right now. Tell us a little bit about how we're seeing this development, especially within the U.S. military.
At the moment, the US military forces running operations against Iran are publicly saying they're using a variety of advanced AI tools to prosecute their operations. That's to crunch data, bringing work down that normally took days or hours down to mere seconds. And also, I've been told by the spokesperson of Central Command, to help generate so-called points of interest. That's everything short of a target, but means things like elevation, location, and what precisely is there. So we can definitely see that in these operations, AI is happening.
What is different, though, do you think, in the sense that the US military has already been embedding different AI technologies for decades? Why do you think it's being sped up, and what are the ramifications of that as well?
This speaks to a long-term concern of the US as it emerged from its so-called GWOT, the Global War on Terror, and began to assess that China had been studying America's weak points on the military front for 10 years. And in 2017, the US starts this effort known as Project Maven, which I explore in my book, to develop AI and put it into the battlefield. This is about fearing that the US is falling behind on advanced technology and that China is able to speed up. It's very much undertaken with the possibility that the US and China may one day face off in a war, and that decisions may be made at lightning speed, faster than humans can think or react.
And the problem is that artificial intelligence is not perfect, at least not yet. What are the risks around some of those fat finger mistakes as well when you also bring in a human into the loop?
Yes, I find out that in some of the early cases of algorithmic development, computer vision algorithms really were not up to scratch. They couldn't function in different terrains between snow, desert, and greenery, for example, and they couldn't identify things like a weapon which can take up only 3 pixels on an image. So relying on this technology clearly is fraught, but it was, of course, developmental. Things have improved, but I'm told that still, of course, given the research that AI can escalate when turning to a large language model or generative AI and asking it a question, it can also tend to agree. So if there is this concern that AI will lead the US and others who use it towards the direction of further conflict.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask about, because I mean, many people are familiar with Clausewitz, his idea of the fog of war, and just talking about the general level of uncertainty. Do you think that with AI technologies and the more than 200 people that you spoke to write this book, do we see an increase in the fog of war, or does AI actually manage to decrease it?
There are 2 parts to this. For the people really advocating for this technology, they hoped that battlefield information delivered in real time that could do things as simple and also as hard as identify where the enemy is, where US forces are, could help protect US forces, stave off civilian casualties, and enable faster reaction speeds on the battlefield. But the flip side is that AI can go wrong. It's an unpredictable system. It's black box technology. And in many cases, the US is asking operators to begin to use it under the hood. So suggestions are surfaced, and a US operator must decide whether to accept or reject it. For now, a human is very much making those decisions, but there is an intention to speed up warfare so much that things may ultimately become automated.
Yeah, and Katrina, you mentioned, of course, a rivalry between the U.S. and China, and the U.S. potentially feeling that they don't want to fall behind in this technology, fueling the speed here. Where are we at right now?
Well, I think the US assessments are classified, but my understanding is that when it comes to facial recognition, the US feels very much behind where China is. Where it comes to actually integrating military algorithms into systems, digital systems, and practicing with it, I think the US may feel confident that it has the edge, but is in a state of paranoia, concerned that it needs to keep developing. And adoption has been a real cultural challenge for the US within the military. All throughout the period of the 10 years I show in the book so far, the team trying to introduce AI has encountered problems, not only from those in wider society who are terrified about what AI will do to the business of war and to the future of human security, but also within the Pentagon. This team was fighting often its notion of what Pentagon bureaucrats were doing to slow them down, and even themselves. There was dissent about whether to work with Palantir, a huge company now in the defense tech space that has partly made its fortune through Maven Smart System, or whether to go another way and really concentrate on delivering top data to algorithms that could sit on drones.
Right, Project Maven author and Bloomberg reporter covering tech and national security, Katrina Manson. It was really great to get your insights. Thank you so much. And coming up, we'll hear from Droneshield senior advisor Gus McLachlan and Sakana.ai CEO David Ha on how AI is reshaping defense technologies in the region. This is Bloomberg.
You're watching Bloomberg Tech Asia as we examine the growing military uses of AI. Let's bring in our panel. We've got Gus McLachlan. He's a retired Australian Army Major General and now Senior Advisor at Sydney-listed Droneshield. Also joining us is David Ha, co-founder and CEO of Sakana.ai. His firm has been selected by Japan's Defense Innovation Technology Institute for a major multi-year research contract. So, Gus, it's really great to have you with us, and I'll start off with you this morning. Let's talk about how AI technology are really modernizing the way that we think about decision-making within forces and also integrating forces together, because we've spoken previously about what's called an MDC2 system, multi-domain command and control, but just how significant is that and how is that likely to reshape warfare as well?
Yeah, hello, Annabelle. Look, for the early part of my military career, one of the big challenges that senior leaders had was not having enough information. We always were trained to make decisions with the information available, knowing that we might not know everything. Toward the back end of my military career, that whole situation reversed. Senior leaders are now awash with information. In fact, they're probably overwhelmed. And the sensors that on aircraft, on drones, on satellites, etc., are bringing in terabytes of data. And what that means is we need systems that can help those senior leaders make decisions. And of course, AI, machine assistance, is an obvious solution. Now, we've heard from Katrina all the potential pitfalls, but we're seeing in the US air campaign over Iran, the rate of effort that, as I'm understanding it, is they've prosecuted over 1,000 targets a day. And when you think about the orchestration of things like airborne refueling, airborne early warning and control aircraft, picking out those targets and vectoring aircraft in and out, that's an extraordinary advancement even in the few years since I've left the military, only possible with AI support. So the potential is enormous. Of course, the pitfalls, are clear as well.
And to Gus's point, David, of course, the massive loads of information that you have to sift through. That's sort of where Sakana.ai has also tried to help the defense ministry here in Japan. Tell us a little bit about your latest project.
Sure. Thanks for having me on the show, Shery. For Sakana.ai, we're really excited to actually start working in the defense sector. We recently closed our Series B round, raising $200 million. As you mentioned, we secured a major contract with the Ministry of Defense, working on efficient AI systems to upgrade national defense information infrastructure, which includes building systems to analyze massive amounts of multimodal data, from land, sea, and air. And as Gus mentioned, it's all about how to integrate information across modalities. And AI is really efficient at analyzing through unstructured information. We're building systems not just to analyze information centrally, but also developing small visual language models that can fit on device, because a lot of this information needs to be analyzed first locally, for example, on drone devices or on other specific assets. The key is to help Japan upgrade the modern command and control systems, and that's one of the focuses of Sakana.ai after our Series B round.
David, I'm interested how this relationship with the Ministry of Defence works. What's the amount of information sharing from their side and also from your side in terms of I guess the AI capabilities that you have to share?
For us, this is really our first defense contract, major defense contract with the Ministry of Defense. It is, as you mentioned, acquired through the ATLA agency. So it's a multi-year research project, and we're starting out working with the open source information sources. I think, over time, we expect to scale up the systems into other parts of the governments. And, this is part of a broader effort after our Series B of working in defense, scaling up our enterprise solutions globally, and we're also developing consumer-facing products for Japan as well, like Sakana Chats.
Consumer-facing, but also when it comes to information sifting, you already worked with, say, the local newspaper Yomiuri when it comes to sifting through posts and trying to understand the narrative as well.
Yes. One of our technology based on the AI scientists, which to automate AI-driven research discovery, is to enable our systems to analyze vast amounts of different information and come up with new hypotheses. Our system is able to, one example is, as you mentioned, Yomiuri Shimbun. We partner with them, deploying our systems to analyze over 1 million social media posts. After the Takeichi remarks last year, sifting through information from Weibo and also on Western social media to analyze and hypothesize how about state-backed information campaigns influencing
Japan. As the tensions between Japan and China rose.
Yes. So that was quite an interesting study. Go ahead.
Yeah, continue.
So our system is able to sift through 1 million social media posts, and we analyze how, for example, the Chinese state uses like a kind of a wait and see approach. There's a 6-day kind of quiet lag when nothing happened after the Takaichi remarks, and we examine different strategies that AI analyzed that might potentially have happened. And one of the advantages of using AI technology is it's not necessarily, it can discover things that are not especially written in the keywords. When you have 1 million posts, you want to analyze the overall narrative that's being constructed. And these things are cannot be done by just shifting for specific keywords. And this is where the technology will help.
Gus, I want to get your take on how much humans can really stay in the loop, because this is one of the key questions around how AI is applied and whether you can actually continue to have human decision making that's part of general processes. What's your view on that?
Yeah, in my career, and I guess in what I would call the democratic military tradition, we expect that a human will always make the final decision. Now that's easy to say, but if you're sitting in a ship, for example, and there's a hypersonic cruise missile heading towards your ship, there might only be seconds before it arrives. We're going to have to trust the machine will know better than us. And I think for some time in environments like war at sea, machine assistants and algorithms have probably been trusted. Now, in a cluttered urban environment, for example, the war in Gaza, where engagement ranges might only be 100 or 200 metres, we can't just leave machines unchecked to retaliate when we perceive an incoming threat, for example. Or certainly that would be the expectation in my career. Now, the Anthropic standoff in the US, I think, is occurred because of exactly this issue. People like Hegseth, the new Secretary of the Department of War, he has a view that we should somehow take the gloves off and let these systems work to their absolute potential, with perhaps less consideration for the laws of war, whereas Anthropic and frankly most of us in the democratic Western tradition would want those controls in place. The reality is, as David said, there's so many uses of AI that I think we're going to have to work out where we trust the machines. Sorting through troves of data and giving us trend analysis is an example, or decentralized out on that attack drone. We saw the Ukrainian Operation Spider's Web that targeted the strategic bomber fleet of the Russian military. We're pretty sure the last 1,000-metre flight of those drones was AI-enabled, meaning they had an image of those bombers in their database. They were programmed to identify that image, fly towards it, and hit the most vulnerable position. You don't need a person in the loop when the image is that clear. So many uses. We're just going to have to work out where to put the big figurative red button, which is the human cutout button, right, versus where we will have to automate.
So you're really talking about differentiating the decision types that takes place in a military setting, right? When you talked about Anthropic and, of course, the fallout with the Pentagon, tell us a little bit more about this partnership between the government and the private sector and what defense contractors need to do here.
Yeah, well, you've already mentioned in the program two very big or very new big advanced technology companies, Palantir and Anthropic. I was familiar with Palantir during my time in service, and they are one of the very first big data analytic platforms that could search across multiple databases. In the global war on terror, for example, we often had individuals having 4 or 5 different names depending on the cultural setting of that name. Tools like the Palantir analytic tools could sort through those and identify that we might be talking about the same individual. Anthropic is the next generation on, and I think the operation that the Americans are conducting now is an example of the speed and complexity that it can ingest and then help them make a more coherent plan. Of course, as it becomes more and more embedded in their systems, once it's inside the ICT security protocols and the personnel security protocols, it becomes, more pervasive and harder to dislodge. But at the same time, that's when the controls that are around it are absolutely important. This is new ground, frankly, and I think the standoff is going to inform a lot of the ways in which company deals with their governments and militaries.
Gus, really great to have those insights this morning, and David as well. That was Gus McLachlan, their retired Australian Army Major General and Droneshield Senior Advisor, as well as David Hyde, the co-founder and CEO of Sakana.ai. We're going to have a lot more ahead on Bloomberg Tech Asia. Stay with us. Well, Shery, it's been a really fascinating episode just talking about how this AI arms race is building and really the evolution as well, because AI technologies have been in use by defence forces for decades now, but there's no doubt really from the people that we've spoken to that the pace of this integration is what's being sped up. And we've heard from Katrina, of course, talking about the Maven system, for instance, but also Palantir itself recently saying that Iran is really the first major AI-driven conflict that we've seen. I think there's a lot of questions around the ethical implications of this, of course, as well, and what it means for military decision-making, because, Gus, we were speaking with him about the so-called OODA loop, or the military decision-making process, essentially, that big question, as you integrate AI and you speed up military decision-making, does that inject greater uncertainty or bring more clarity to the battlefield?
Yeah, to your point, Palantir CTO Sankar really saying that the Iran war is the first major conflict where we are seeing artificial intelligence being used at this scale, right? Perhaps something that was similar to what the Ukraine war signified for drone warfare. But you said it, the ethical concerns are big, especially if we're talking about these advances that are happening at lightning speed in a regulatory vacuum, right? What does that mean for these decisions, and where do machines come in when these machines are not perfect at this point? So human in the loop is also another idea that we've had, but given the speed of the decision making, Gus, of course, you mentioned how he was talking really about differentiating the decision types and where a human would really have oversight in this military setting.
Yeah, that's right. Some decisions are just too big that you really do need to maintain that human observation or integration into that decision-making process. Others, though, just given the volumes of data that's now being collected, and we were speaking with Sakana.ai, for instance, about their project with local media in Japan, but just using AI to sift through open source intelligence, for instance, it's a big question, of course, around how it evolves from here. But undoubtedly, given you've got that complex race between the US and China for military supremacy, we will continue to see more integration despite all of the ethical concerns that continue to persist. But that's it for this episode of Bloomberg Tech Asia. Stay tuned next month for more. This is Bloomberg.